Hi, Barbara. Excited to have you here with us.
It's great to be there. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me.
So, the intention behind this interview is really to create that companion resource to go with the Pharma R&D cheat sheet that we created together. And the idea here is to go into some of the less obvious or more important points that we covered in the questions there. We covered a lot of topics. And as we were kind of developing this cheat sheet, it was amazing to hear behind the scene perspective of big pharma executives like Barbara that's seen a lot, and to hear a little bit about what are the things that are going through kind of her mind as she's meeting companies, as big pharma is collaborating with the entrepreneurs. So as always, this interview and the cheat sheet are meant to help founders own in on the main three issues that tend to impact adoption in healthcare. So the first thing is obviously, is this a hair on fire challenge or is it another problem? And you need to think to yourself that there are a lot of other entrepreneurs selling people like Barbara in these big pharmas, and your solution really needs to stand out. It also needs to meet their relative priorities. So mainly the things that they have on their mind right now that they want to improve in their business. As we're thinking about number two is around planning ahead. You need to identify the potential barriers to adoption that may rise when selling to pharma companies. Compliance, IP, clinical evidence, companion diagnostics, regulation, integration to Medidata, to IQVIA, to whoever. You need to know beforehand because this will be a long journey. Number three is around understanding the differentiation across the different offerings. So it's a whole different ballgame if you're developing a diagnostic solution, if you're developing a therapeutic platform, or if you're simply trying to impact the operations of a clinical trial. It's very, very different. And each will require different nuances and working differently with the relevant stakeholders within the pharma. But before we begin, let's kick things off by hearing a little bit about you, Barbara, and your own background as you grew inside this industry.
Thank you. Yeah, in a nutshell, I received my PhD from the Johns Hopkins University in genetics. And then I went on to do my postdoctoral fellowship at the Salk Institute, also in molecular biology and genetics. From there, I knew I wanted to go into translational research, so I wanted to apply research into development of drugs. And so I joined the biotech industry in the San Diego area. I was in biotech in various positions from 1991 until 2010. And the various positions included VP of R&D of a 60-person company, developing a gene therapy program, chief operating officer, as well as a CEO of the company. So I spent a lot of time in the various positions learning, what it takes to get funded by VCs, as well as what it takes to get your research into clinical stages. In 2010, I was recruited by Pfizer to join their new division called the Emerging Science and Innovation Team. There, I was in Pfizer for 13 years, and I learned the aspects of what it takes to get drugs from biotech into large pharma. And so I led a team of 18 individuals across the world, scouting for new opportunities that would complement and enhance the internal portfolio within Pfizer. So it was a great opportunity not only to scout for new science that would complement the internal portfolio, but it was also a great learning experience to understand what it takes to bring in emerging science, innovative science into a large pharma and get it through the governance process, get it through what research plans, timelines, costs, things that it needed to do to actually get drugs into patients. So it was a great close to 30 years of science and new experiences, and it was a great opportunity and I want to take this time to share with you kind of what my learnings were within those two kind of timeframes of being in biotech as well as being in large pharma.
I think there are a lot of people that are really looking to learn from that experience now on the biotech side, as well as big pharma. We definitely see here a lot of innovators coming from software domains and trying to sell into big pharma and learn all the things that you know before us and can teach us now. So with that, let's dive right into it. So for those of you that are following along, please feel free to check out our cheat sheet at lionbird.com/pharma R&D cheat sheet. So let's start at the beginning. So any innovator that is looking to solve a problem in healthcare knows that it needs to be impactful, right? You need to move the needle. It needs to influence the ROI or lead to some sort of cost reduction for the executives on the other side to dedicate their time to it and really push it within the organization, especially these big organizations. And I think that especially in recent years, but even before that, pharma has always been a favorite client to digital health founders, as they always have that need for external innovation. And one of the things that is going through my mind is, what are the checkboxes that you must check in terms of impacting the business for these pharma R&D executives, for them to want to really push your solution along?
I think that entrepreneurs face several challenges. One is you have to have a great scientific data, and it has to stand up. It has to be rigorous. The other thing that most scientists don't appreciate is that you need to have a compelling business model for the pharma company to actually look at it and take it up. Why is it impactful to their portfolio? And I can think of a couple things. One, how does your product or technology work? What is the mechanism of action? Does it address an unmet need? What evidence do you have? Does it demonstrate that your product or your technology has potential to impact patients? Depending on where you are in the stages of development, what is the preclinical efficacy of your drug or your technology? What is your next milestone? Where's going to be the next inflection point for your program? What is known about the pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics of your product? Have you evaluated is there any toxicity if you're developing a drug, for example? Is there any known toxicity, safety, the safety profile, stability, and manufacturing? Do you know anything about the manufacturing process? And I think this is going to be impactful. So I think there's lots of questions that you should be asking yourself before you even go to a pharma, because they're going to be asking you that as soon as you knock on their door.
Just to double click on that, as I'm trying to think to myself, I'm a founder, I'm building my pitch and so forth. How much do I need to emphasize, or what weight would you recommend me to emphasize the clinical validity or the evidence? We'll go into that a bit later, but versus impact of getting drugs to market, cost reduction from an operational perspective. How much is expected from the innovator to kind of provide the pharma in these early sales stages?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things you should ask yourself is, why do you partner in the first place? And the idea here is to accelerate product or technology development. You want to marry your strengths from the biotech industry to those of the partner. So you bring in the biotech brings in innovation, and the pharma companies bring in their drug development expertise. And so when you marry those two, it's a win-win situation. And so I think that's what you're looking to bring in, that innovation and have the pharma bring in their development expertise. The idea is really to get drugs to patients faster or technology to patients faster. And pharma is always looking to decrease cycle times, meaning that they're always looking to enhance the time between a phase 1 to a phase 2 to a phase 3 in order to get drugs to patients faster. And that's the whole goal. You remember when you file your IP, you have a certain time window where your product is going to be fully protected. And once you start that development clock, you want to make sure you have enough time at the end, enough runway at the end, one, to have a protected product, but also to bring in enough revenue that's going to make worth all of the development costs that you spent already in those years. And so you want to reduce cycle time as much as possible. And I think that's what biotech industry can help with, because they look at things in a faster time frame. They're looking at different innovative methods. And so bringing in that mindset is actually a very positive thing into the pharma company.
And as we're kind of thinking about that sales process to the pharmas, well, one of the things that anyone who ever tried to sell to pharma will tell you is that these sales take their time, and you really need to know your audience. And many times your champion can change, or you will need to convince multiple people in the group. And when you'll be pitching your product, many times you'll have 10 people in the room, right? Or 8 or 12, and they will all need to approve your solution. And there are common barriers that tend to happen over and over again as founders are pitching pharma. So I wanted to ask you, what are the potential challenges that you think entrepreneurs selling into this space to the pharma R&D need to know beforehand? And maybe talk a little bit about the kind of the composition of the people in the room for people to get that taste.
Yeah, I can't tell you how important that question is, because you need to know your audience. You need to know who you're speaking with. And so if you're at a meeting, at a scientific meeting, and you're at a poster session and you're standing in front of your data, are you talking to a scientist? Are you talking to someone that's a transactional BD person, a business development person? You need to find out who that is. Or maybe you're lucky enough to be at a meeting where you're on an airplane, or you're at a golf course and you have 5 minutes with the CEO of the company or the CSO of a research unit. It's one of these things where you have to be ready for that 5-minute elevator pitch to talk about your technology. So you really need to know who you're speaking with. And if you're speaking with a business development person that's heading up search and evaluation for a particular therapeutic area, that business development person is not going to be the decision maker. That person is going to be the person that brings the technology in, brings you in to actually speak the chief scientific officer of a research unit to talk about what you're doing and how your technology and or therapeutic is actually differentiated above everything else. And so it's really kind of a 2-step process where you get your foot in the door by speaking to the scientists kind of congregate and say, this is really great technology. Let's actually bring it in and talk a little to a broader audience. That, depending on where you are in development, that could include people that are just in the research unit. But if you're farther along or in getting close to the clinic, then you're going to have people on the clinical development side. You're going to have people on the regulatory side. You're going to have people on the manufacturing side. So it's got to be a complete package. It just can't be, this is great technology, or this is, a great therapeutic area. You have to explain how it differentiates, what the manufacturing process is. Is it simple? Is it a 20-step process, which is not going to fly if you're making a drug? But it's something that you need to understand and ask the questions. Who is going to be sitting in the room when I'm speaking to everybody? And so that you can address kind of the potential questions that will come through the meeting. So it's really important to understand that question. And the other thing I can say is, ask a lot of questions. Just ask. It's not a problem to ask questions. And I would also say that you need to understand what their governance process is. And most pharmas will have governance processes, and they're varied. They go from, and it could be the size of the deal that affects the governance process, or type of governance process that you're going to have. So it could be as simple as, if it's going to be a research collaboration, it could be something that the chief scientific officer of that research unit could say, okay, I want to do this deal and I'm going to give you $1 million and cover all your expenses and do it that way. But if it's a much larger deal where you're going to be getting an upfront as well as covering research cost expenses, there's so much that goes into it between the work plan, things like that, that you need to, the governance process could be presenting in front of the head of R&D. It could be a subcommittee, and those subcommittees tend to meet on a regular basis, but it also could be an ad hoc. So you have to be prepared for presenting. And a lot of times it's not you presenting, it's your search and evaluation member that is presenting on your behalf, or someone within the research unit that's presenting on your behalf. So you also, the communication between you and that research person or search and evaluation has to be spot on, and you have to connect to make sure that they're not going to be stealing your technology. That's not the case. They're not phishing. What they're trying to do is present the pros and cons of your research, the benefits, the risks, where are the gaps, and you need to help them to get them to present your case in the best light.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's probably a very important lesson for founders to know in advance in terms of kind of that exposure, right? You're exposing everything, but you're exposing everything because this is one of the most regulated industries in the world, and they cannot work with you unless you do that beforehand. I think that's also, we're not going to go into the data collection and data protection sections of the cheat sheet now, although you have it right in front of you, but it is definitely one of the most important areas to understand. Now, just to expand a little bit on the question of the people in the room, one of the things that we've been seeing in recent years, now we're saying LLMs, before that we said AI, data science is definitely top of mind, I think, for pharma, and a lot of them have really great internal R&D data science teams. What do founders need to know as they're kind of having these conversations with the internal R&D scientists? What would you say is kind of an important conversation to have with them, and how do you get them on your side in terms of wanting to adopt your solution?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of homework that the entrepreneur has to do before they actually have those discussions. One is you need to find the right partner. This can be a huge black box, and a lot of times, you know, but I think you need to do your homework before you actually have those discussions. And one of the things that you can do is go online and look to see if you're looking at different pharma partners, potential partners, what is their clinical history? Everyone publishes, the phase 1s, the phase 2s, the phase 3s, what's in registration, and they publish that online. It's publicly available, and you can see kind of the thematic areas that the partners are interested in. So if you're interested in neurodegenerative diseases and the pharma company isn't into that area, then you're barking up the wrong tree to go to them to say, what do you think about my technology? You need to find a partner that's actually going to be interested in your thematic area. And so I think it behooves you to understand kind of what the pharma partner is what is currently developing. And so with that, and again, it depends on where you are in development, is to request that you have clinical people in the room, that you have some regulatory people in the room, and you can not just have the scientists in the room, but also have the appropriate people that are going to understand where you are. Because when you present your technology to the scientific champions, you want to make the case that this is where we are, this is the next steps. And it always helps when you say, this is the gap I see right now, and be very honest and say, this is a gap that we plan to fill later, but we're not doing it now because this is going to be the next milestone for us, is to get into phase 1. And so Maybe you don't have all, A through Z or Z, maybe you don't have all those steps, but maybe you have, instead of 26 steps, maybe you only have 20 of them. And so but identifying and letting everyone know that you know what the gaps are is a huge benefit to your credibility, to say that, yes, I'm aware of that. But I can also see that I don't need to have those right now. I can fill them in at the latter point. So I would insist on having the right people at the meeting, depending on where you are within your development.
So as you're kind of talking a little bit about that kind of the science component, right, of your solution, at the end of the day, we're getting drugs to market. That's the business. And there has to be a very strong core science in your solution, data focused or chemical or biological or whatnot. And another part of the cheat sheet is that we talked a little bit about that part of clinical evidence, right? What is the clinical evidence that you bring with you? And maybe I'll also tie it into the factor of financial stability the pharma expects from me as a founder that is selling to them, right? So what is that? It connects to a certain degree of maturity, right? That a company must, a potential vendor must present as they're selling to you, in terms of, you need to know they'll be around next year in terms of that financial resilience, but also in terms of the clinical evidence they provide. So with that, it would be great to hear a little bit from you. Our listeners would love to hear a little bit from you about, as you're looking at their product, what are the things that are most important to you, for you to see in terms of clinical evidence? And when is there a phase that is too soon, that is too early? How do you think about that?
I think that's a great question, and it has a lot of different answers to it. And I think that if you're bringing in a solution that is an unmet need, or it's best in class or first in class molecule, or you're bringing in a diagnostic that is going to identify and differentiate a subpopulation of patients that allows you to help the pharma company choose the right individuals that could potentially respond to a drug, you have to think about where you are and what question you're bringing to the pharma company. So if you are bringing in a diagnostic, for example, that is going to separate a subset of patients and bring it into a trial where the pharma company could then show that their drug is effective at a higher level in that subpopulation of patients, that's going to have a significant impact on the time that it would take to get that drug into patients, into the right patient population. So right there, you're differentiating yourself from just a standard diagnostic. And so I think those are the things that you have to say and really stress, that this is how I'm differentiating from all the rest of the competitors out there. And I might add, you really need to know who your competition is. That's one of the things that, that everyone will evaluate. Who's the competition? Where do you stand? If you're in basic research and there's a partner out there or a competitor out there that is in phase 2, if you don't differentiate from that phase 2 competitor, you're going to have a hard time getting traction for any kind of deal that's going to be done, because you're second to market, you're way behind. And so you have to have that differentiation. So on a clinical setting, there are certain drugs where pharma's not even going to look at it until it's got clinical efficacy. So if you're in rare diseases or you're in oncology, then your phase 1 is going to be in patients. However, in all the other fields, therapeutic areas, your phase 1 is going to be in healthy volunteers. So you're not going to have any kind of understanding of efficacy for those other indications until you're in phase 2 or a late phase 1B. So it really, and some pharma companies will want to see clinical efficacy before they actually move on to a partnership, and it has to be placebo controlled. A lot of the times you don't you'll see data that is, or at least when I was scouting for new opportunities, you would see data that was not placebo controlled. And so the pharma's going to want to see data from a placebo controlled clinical study. And so it's very important to have that placebo basis there.
And how are you thinking, as a follow-up to that, how are you thinking about the differences that we see between diagnostic platforms, for example, to therapeutic platforms? Is there a higher bar of evidence that is required to these different solutions?
Again, you need to understand the partner. There are some pharma companies that do both diagnostics as well as therapeutic drug development. And there are other pharmas that only do just therapeutic development. So you need to understand kind of where your technology fits. Is there a higher bar? I wouldn't say that there's a higher bar. I think they're the same. But if your diagnostic, as I said earlier, can differentiate a subset of patients for a particular therapeutic drug, that's going to be an important parameter that is going to want to be brought up immediately to the forefront. And I think you need to be persistent on that. And it might not be the right time, and it depends on, certain companies will develop their companion diagnostics through a CRO or through a joint venture. Others will develop it internally. It just really depends on the partner. There are some times when the FDA will require that companion diagnostic be developed along with the therapeutic area to make sure that the patients are being treated with your drug or with their drug, and they are the right patients to be receiving that drug. So it's important to, again, understand what companies develop their own diagnostics, which companies kind of farm it out, and which companies will not do it at all. So you just need to understand that.
Switching to a different kind of section of the cheat sheet, I think one of the things that are very, very much important to talk about is intellectual property. Intellectual property in this industry is a lot, right? It's everything.
Yeah.
This is an industry where we look at the IP of the drug that was developed in-house sometimes, but I can be also I could be a biotech developing a therapeutic, and right in line with kind of the therapeutic area the big pharma is most interested in. And the IP can also be relevant in terms of kind of a data platform that can help my customer, big pharma, extend the time period for the IP, and that can also be very, very meaningful. So I want to ask you in relation to IP, if you can, tell us a little bit about how is, from the biotech lens, but also from big pharma lens, how are you thinking about kind of IP protection, and how are you thinking about it as you're kind of forming that contract and trying to plan ahead for what's to come?
Great question. Intellectual property is probably, besides the science and the data that you're presenting, is probably the second strongest point of your technology that you have to have. You need to protect that technology, the diagnostic, the drug. And what I would say is that you can file early and you can file a provisional patent. And then you have 1 year to actually, from that provisional, to actually fill in some of the data and things like that. But at least that's protected. And then 1 year later, you will file your utility patent that will be all encompassing and fully protective. And then it goes through prosecution through the patent office. So one of the things that pharma looks at is, what kind of patent protection do you have? And composition of matter patents are the strongest, and they're always looked at as to be the best umbrella to protect you from other competition. But there are other patents out there as well that you can bolster, including formulation patents, method patents, things like that. But the best one to have is a composition of matter. And so that's fully protective. As I said, it's an umbrella that protects you from all the competition. So once you have that, then you can actually publish data. You can present your data at meetings, but before that, if you present anything that is not protected, it's gone, it's lost, it's not protected. And so part of the money that you're going to be getting either in upfronts or in milestone payments is all hinges on whether you have your technology patent protected. So it is worth working with your technology transfer office if you're coming from an academic facility, or you've already created that new biotech and you're working with a intellectual property attorney to help you file that IP. And I would say file early. There's different strategies, but I would say file early so that you can actually get out there and talk about your technology and and get it published. People look at having published papers as in a reputable journal as a really strength to your technology.
And expanding a little on that part from the more business perspective, how do I protect my core IP? How do I think of the IP that is formed together with the pharma as part of our collaboration? What do you think is important to kind of think about there?
Yeah, another critical question, especially when you're talking, deal terms and things like that. It usually what will happen is all the IP that you bring into a collaboration and all the earlier stuff will stay as your invention. What happens in a collaboration where you're developing technology together, and whether it's a discovery platform, that's usually joint. It could be joint IP between you, your company, and the pharma, or it could be all owned by the pharma company. It really depends on the negotiation during that route. So it's during the discussions, and it's important to understand where you want to go. If you improve your platform technology, do you own it? Does the pharma own it? Is it joint owned? And so those are questions that you have to ask yourself. Do you plan on having other deals, other collaborations where you need to take that IP and apply it to a different therapeutic area, for example, which is completely possible. So you need to think about kind of the long range, not just this deal right now, but think about, okay, I want to do 5 more deals in the next 3 years. And it's all going to be on this basic development platform. And so do I want to be able to extend that technology to different therapeutic areas? How do I protect it through the IP process and not lose out on any future developments? So it's really important to really understand where you want to go in your duration of the company.
No, I think it's really, really important. And I think one of the things that, entrepreneurs think about often is really that concept of how do I price my solution? How do I know how much it will be worth in the future? How will it develop? And I think there is no right and wrong here. You better have good lawyers by your side to really kind of prepare in advance. But it's definitely very, very critical. And one of the things that you were mentioning is really that difference between early stage, as we were talking, between the early stage companies and the late stage companies in terms of the proof they need to provide you in terms of the regulatory process. So it would be great if you could expand a little bit about the differences you see between the earlier stage companies and the later stage companies in terms of what is expected from them in that kind of deal-making process.
So it really depends on, again, how differentiated you are relative to the competition that's out there. And if you're early on and there's competition that's already in, let's just say in phase 1, for example, but you are differentiated in the fact that 2 ways. Let's just say instead of a 20-step synthesis, you've now found a molecule that you can craft in the 10-step synthesis. That is a huge reduction in time, cost for looking at future development. And so you're going to be able to make that drug faster. The other thing is if So that's one point. Second point is if you're showing a tenfold reduction in the amount of drug that's used, or even higher, potentially maybe it's a 20-fold reduction in the amount of drug that's used, that it elicits the same response, the same level of efficacy. Again, another reduction in cost because you're using less drug. Potentially also a safety, you're providing a safety benefit because you're using less drug, which means there will be less chance of a side effect that's occurring because you're, having to use more drug, for example. So you have to understand how you differentiate and how that's going to impact both cost, time, and just getting the drugs into patients so that you can see the benefit of your drug.
I think that these little kind of tips, I would say, on the commercialization side are very, very much important, especially as we see a lot of companies now going into the drug discovery arena. I would say people coming from other domains, and they're very much new to the concept of how you price solutions offerings in pharma, and how you're thinking about pricing also the identification of a new target or new IP, and you had some interesting comments on that, so it would be really great to hear a little bit about your feedback in terms of right of first negotiation, right of first refusal, how entrepreneurs should be thinking about that, and how they should be thinking, in essence, about generating additional value stream for the pharma, for their client, and for maybe third parties. So all these kind of, I would call it upselling opportunities.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you're developing a drug, for example, and it is effective in 2 indications, a lot of times commercial groups will not like to develop that for 2 different indications. They would rather have 2 molecules and develop them separately because then you can't reformulate one, and the pricing structure for a certain indication could be very different from a pricing structure from a different indication. So the idea is that the commercial group would, in my experience, would rather have 2 drugs rather than just have one, and prevent it being reformulated by someone else to hit the other indication, and maybe they could charge a lower price. So pricing is incredibly important during the discussions. Usually you would have those discussions, at least in my experience, if you're in clinical development or near clinical development, that you would want to bring in a commercial expert within the pharma company that would have an idea on what the value and what they could be charged for that particular drug. Now, you can do it yourself, and a lot of people do, to evaluate what you think the clinical development or what the commercial value of that drug would be. But most farmers are going to want to do that themselves to reinsure and validate the numbers that you might have come up with. So, and the other thing is that you brought up are when you're talking deal structure and you're looking to on IP side of things, and let's just say you have a research collaboration and something new develops. Well, who owns that new therapeutic area, or maybe it's a new therapeutic drug, or maybe it's a new diagnostic that came out, or the development of the platform technology was innovative. So you might put into the deal structure either right of first negotiation, which is a ROFN, or you might put into a right of first refusal. And so the pharma is going to want to extend that time. They're going to want to say, oh, I need 9 months to be able to make that decision of whether we're going to negotiate or we're going to refuse. And you can develop that someplace else. And you want it, as the entrepreneurial, want it to be the shortest time possible. So it is something that is you would actually have to hammer out during the negotiations of the deal to kind of understand if something new comes up. What's that length of time where you're going to give the pharma partner either time to look at the new entity, the new drug or the new technology, or is it going to be 3 months, 6 months, and then say, this is enough time, you either have to make a decision or I'm going to now go out and find another partner for this. So that's important to actually think about that when you're doing any kind of negotiations with a pharma partner. And
Yeah.
I would definitely, I agree, you have to have legal, and legal can be your best friend. It's good to have legal counsel. Not only will they help with all the legal documents that you need, but they also see a lot, so they can come up with creative deal structures. And so having a good legal counsel is to your advantage.
And I think that in terms of when we're thinking about basically the R&D side of pharma, so we think the therapeutic, we think about the diagnostic, and there's obviously a lot of efforts on the data science side in trying to kind of optimize and improve, kind of generate better outcomes for pharma companies to get more drugs to market, in essence, less than 10%. We definitely have a lot of work to do there. But at the same time, we know that drug development is very, very, very costly. One of the things that in recent years pharma companies have started doing is utilizing the new digital endpoints that allow you to kind of have a more precise and individualized measure to assess condition progression. And that's an area that I think is super interesting from the neuro side. Definitely, yeah. We see a lot of opportunities there. And it would be great to hear kind of your feedback in terms of what do you think are the barriers that are very much present there in terms of this new methodology, but at the same time, where the opportunities lies and what are the things that you need to take into account?
The field is ever changing and growing. There's so many things that can be added into clinical trials. For example, if you're looking at a inflammation immunology therapeutic area, and one of the FDA approved outcomes is the 6-minute walk test, for example. There you're relying, you go in and you do a 6-minute walk test, and you're assessing how well the patient's doing during that 6-minute walk test, or can they even make 6 minutes? So it's something that is evaluated once every time the patient comes into the clinical site. So now that they're developing, all these new technologies that measure steps, for example, on your watches, now I have real time that goes right to my cell phone, and I know how many steps I took. And it is one of these things that I can tell how many calories I burnt from all the steps I took and things like that. So how do you incorporate all of that new technology into your clinical development? So first of all, those devices need to be FDA approved. And what's usually done is that in the early studies, the phase 1s and potentially the early phase 2As, for example, that you'll still have, for example, the 6-minute walk test, which is FDA approved, and that will be the outcome that the study will use. But the steps that are calculated on your watch, on your phone, will be an observational study. And so that observation is not recorded into regulatory filings. It is for your information only, or the pharma's company's information only. So you need to be in there as an observation. And then once the observation and this FDA approved 6-minute walk test can be equated and evaluated to head, and the FDA sees the data that says, okay, this watch is collecting this same data as my 6-minute walk test, and it gets approved by the FDA, then you can incorporate that into more like your phase 3s, which requires you would want to have all of that as regulatory data that needs to get submitted to the FDA. So the pharma is going to want to see how is your new device compared to an FDA regulated endpoint, and they are going to want to understand, how are you planning on equating the FDA regulated output to your development. And so it's in your device. And so there's a process, and it's going to take a little bit longer, but there is a path that can be followed. But again, it starts out as being observational, and then it gets moved over into more of a regulatory filings that your device will then exceed or meet or replace the current FDA regulated output.
And say I want to kind of I've developed this kind of interesting, very innovative data platform that provides, let's take the world of psychology, let's take psychoeducation, or let's take CBT and so forth. If I want to enhance a therapeutic, right? There is an approved therapeutic and I want to enhance it with my intervention, connecting it a little bit to the kind of digital endpoint sphere. And say I go actually on a trial with the pharma, with my intervention as kind of an added layer. Will I have to go through an independent journey? How is that how do you view that world of kind of joint studies that the pharma do with kind of, for example, the watchmakers or so forth, in order to enhance kind of the efficacy of their drugs, in essence?
It's going to come down to the deal structure, and you're going to want to. It's almost the same thing as developing a therapeutic drug. Your device is going to be replacing a FDA-approved endpoint, and so you'll be working along with the pharma company to develop that, to understand the clinical outcomes. Are you developing improvements along the way while the clinical trial is ongoing? How can those be added into a second trial that's going to be coming next? So it's really important to be a partner and not just hand over the device and say, okay, we'll see you after the end of phase 2 and then hope for the best. You have to be in there along with the partner and collaborating with the partner to answer unexpected questions, things that might come up during the clinical trial. It's really important that you be a part of that and not just be a deliverer of a device.
Well, that sounds easy and not so costly also. So as we're wrapping up, it's been so much fun, and I want to leave our kind of listeners with one last question, even the surprise question.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. So what you don't need to name one, you can name a few, but what do you think of kind of next interesting frontiers or opportunities, blue oceans, when you're selling to pharma R&D?
Well, as a therapeutic area, where I have a couple answers to that question. So I think that the first one is in the therapeutic area. I'd really like to see more on anti-aging and kind of the aging phenomena. And because there's so many comorbidities between cardiovascular health, metabolic health, that decrease over time as you age. And, if you can make a healthier you for a longer period of time, what goes into that. And so the anti-aging process is still very new. It's been studied for a while, but it's still, the data I think is emerging. And so this would be an area that, I would like to see. Where else do I see is AI and machine learning, that this has such an potential impact on where therapeutic areas are going to be developed. One, for speed. If let's just say drug development takes 10 years to go from discovery all the way to launch. If you can decrease that by using artificial intelligence so that you're taking only 5 years rather than 10 years in development, you're getting drugs to patients faster. Your lifetime of your patent is going to have that much more length to it before it expires, or you get loss of exclusivity. So I think that has an impact just on the speed of development, but it also has potential impact on the molecule that you're developing, and using artificial intelligence to design a small molecule to make it more effective, to have less toxicity. The impact for that to the pharma world is immense. And I think that between AI and machine learning, this is going to be revolutionize not just how, well, in multiple ways. How the speed of drug development, but also what drugs are actually getting developed and the toxicities that we shouldn't be seeing that can now be eliminated because of AI. Because you can evaluate so many more drugs at the time, and I think that whole area is going to implode. You're seeing it now. There's so many more drugs that are out there that have gone through the AI machine learning process that it is, I think, a really ripe area to explore.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Barbara, for sharing your kind of amazing insights on the world of pharma R&D. I'm sure our listeners learned a ton. I know I did. And thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it, and even the surprise question. So